The morning light filtered through the kitchen window of my house on Maple Street, casting familiar shadows across the oak table where Margaret and I used to share our coffee. 3 years since her funeral, and I still set out 2 cups before catching myself. Old habits die harder than the people who made them necessary. I was stirring my black coffee, no sugar anymore, doctor's orders, when I heard the crunch of gravel in the driveway. Through the lace curtains Margaret had hung 28 years ago, I watched David's silver BMW pull up fast, wheels spinning slightly on the loose stones. My son didn't visit on Tuesday mornings. Hell, my son didn't visit much at all anymore, not since Margaret passed and the easy conversation died with her. The car door slammed with the sharp finality of a man who'd made up his mind about something. David strode up the front walk in his expensive charcoal suit, the one that probably cost more than I used to make in a month, back when I was building houses with my hands instead of watching them from my kitchen window. His face carried that particular blend of determination and barely controlled panic I remembered from his teenage years, when he'd gotten himself into trouble and needed his old man to fix it. I opened the door before he could knock. At 68, I'd learned to read storms before they hit. "Dad." His smile was quick, practiced, the kind salesmen use when they need something. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Nothing but coffee and the morning paper," I said, stepping back to let him in. "You look like you're carrying some weight this morning." He moved past me into the living room, his eyes scanning the space with the restless energy of a man counting assets. The leather recliner where I spent my evenings, the mahogany bookshelf Margaret had insisted we buy for our anniversary, the family photos arranged just the way she'd left them. Everything exactly as it had been the day she took her last breath in the hospital, and David knew it. "If you were the main character, what would you say first?" "Coffee?" I offered, though he was already sitting on the edge of the sofa, elbows on his knees, hands clasped like he was about to deliver bad news or ask for a loan. Maybe both. "No, thanks. I can't stay long." He ran a hand through his hair, salt and pepper now, like mine had been 20 years ago. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something important, about the future." The word future in David's mouth always meant money. I settled into my chair. The one Margaret used to tease was molded to my shape after 40 years of marriage and careful routine. "I'm listening. It's about this house, this place." He gestured around the room like he was appraising furniture for an estate sale. "It's too big for you. Too much maintenance. Too many memories. Don't you think it might be time to consider alternatives?" I sipped my coffee slowly, tasting the bitterness. Margaret always said I made it too strong, but she'd drink it anyway, adding cream and honey until it suited her. Now I made it the way I liked it, which turned out to be exactly the way she'd complained about for nearly 5 decades. "What kind of alternatives?" David's shoulders relaxed slightly, interpreting my calm tone as agreement. "There are some great retirement communities in the area, places where you wouldn't have to worry about upkeep, where there are people your age, activities, you could make new friends." I thought about the workshop in the basement where I had built Margaret's jewelry box, the garden where her roses still bloomed every spring, despite my clumsy attempts at care, the bedroom where we'd held each other through 47 years of joy and sorrow. I thought about the mortgage I'd burned in the backyard fire pit the summer David graduated college, the deed with both our names on it locked in the safe upstairs. "This house is paid for, son. Has been for 15 years. "I know that." His laugh was forced, nervous. "But the property taxes, the utilities, the constant repairs. Dad, you're sitting on a fortune here. 3-bedroom colonial on 2 acres, 5 minutes from downtown. Do you know what this place is worth in today's market?" I knew exactly what it was worth. The real estate section of the paper had become my guilty pleasure since Margaret died. Not because I wanted to sell, but because I enjoyed seeing the numbers climb. Our house, the one I'd built with overtime pay and weekend shifts, was worth more than I'd made in my best 5 years combined. And what would I do with all that money? Live! David's voice carried an edge of frustration he was trying to mask as enthusiasm. "Travel, enjoy your retirement. You've worked hard your whole life, Dad. You deserve to spend your golden years doing something other than rattling around in this big empty house." Empty. He called it empty like the memories were gone, like Margaret's presence wasn't still folded into every corner, every familiar creak of the floorboards. like the life we'd built here was just square footage and market value. "I'll think about it," I said, which was the polite way of saying no without starting an argument. David's face tightened. "Dad, you've been thinking about it for 3 years. How much longer?" He caught himself, forced that salesman's smile back into place. "I'm just worried about you. We all are." We, meaning David, his wife Jennifer, and her parents who'd moved in with them 2 years ago when Jennifer's father got laid off. 4 adults crammed into David's suburban house, and suddenly my 2 acres looked like a solution to their space problem. "I appreciate the concern," I said, "but I'm managing fine. For now, but what happens when you can't? What happens when you fall down those stairs, or have another heart episode and there's no one around to help?" The heart attack had been mild, the doctor said. A warning shot across the bow. I'd spent 3 days in the hospital with David hovering over me, looking more concerned about the future than the present. When I came home, he'd suggested I might need to make some arrangements for my care. That was 18 months ago, and I hadn't missed a day of my morning walk since. "I'll cross that bridge when I come to it." David stood abruptly, pacing to the window that looked out on Margaret's garden. "Dad, I'm going to be straight with you. This isn't just about your welfare." Finally, the truth always surfaced eventually, like oil on water. "Go on. Jennifer and we're having some financial difficulties. The business has been slow, and with her parents living with us, expenses are tight. If you were to downsize, if you were to sell this place and move somewhere more appropriate for your situation, well, it would help everyone." I set my coffee cup down carefully on the side table, next to the lamp Margaret had bought at an estate sale because she said it had good bones. Everything in this house had good bones, including the man who'd owned it for 32 years. "How much do you owe?" The question caught him off guard. His mouth opened, closed, then settled into a defensive line. "It's not about owing money. It's about cash flow, about how much, David?" He turned away from the window, his reflection ghost-like in the morning glass. 200,000, maybe more. The number hung in the air between us like smoke. $200,000. More money than I'd made in the first 10 years of my marriage, back when David was learning to walk and Margaret was teaching him the difference between right and wrong. Credit cards? Some. Mostly other things. Other things. The kind of debt that came with interest rates that could strangle a man, the kind that made sleep a luxury and breakfast taste like cardboard. You used the house as collateral. It wasn't a question. I could see the answer in the way his shoulders hunched forward, in the way he couldn't meet my eyes. Somewhere in the maze of paperwork and signatures, David had leveraged his future against someone else's patience. It was supposed to be temporary. The business was going to turn around, but then the economy shifted, and clients started tightening their belts, and "You're behind on payments. 3 months?" The words came out in a rush, like confession. "But if I can get some capital, if I can restructure the debt, I can save everything." I thought about the workshop downstairs, about the careful measuring and precise cuts that went into building something that would last, about the foundation work that no one ever saw, but everything depended on. Margaret used to say, I thought too much like a carpenter, but she'd said it with the kind of smile that meant she was proud of the way I approach problems. "And you figured I'd sell the house to help you out of the hole you dug yourself into." "Dad, it's not like that." "What's it like then?" David sank back onto the sofa, his expensive suit wrinkled now, his salesman confidence gone. For a moment, he looked like the boy who used to sit at this same spot to confess he'd broken something, waiting for his punishment and hoping for understanding. "I'm drowning, Dad. We're all drowning. Jennifer's parents can't contribute anything, and the mortgage on our place is killing us. I thought maybe this house could be the answer for everyone. You could move somewhere easier to manage. We could use part of the money to get back on our feet, and Jennifer's parents could have their own space. In my house, in what would be our house, as a family, our house, the house I'd built with 40 years of early mornings and calloused hands, the house where Margaret had painted every room at least twice, where we'd hosted Christmas dinners and birthday parties and quiet Sunday afternoons reading the paper together, where I'd carried her over the threshold as a bride and held her hand as she died. "I need to think about this," I said. David's face brightened like I'd offered him a lifeline. "Of course, take all the time you need. But Dad, don't wait too long. The people I owe money to, they're not known for their patience. After he left, I sat in my chair and watched the dust motes dance in the morning light. The house settled around me with its familiar sounds, the whisper of air through the vents, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the grandfather clock Margaret had inherited from her mother. Sounds that had been the soundtrack to my marriage and now provided the rhythm of my solitude. I walked through each room slowly, seeing it through David's eyes. The living room with its outdated furniture and faded family photos, the dining room we'd used for holidays and special occasions, the table now gathering dust under Margaret's good china, the kitchen where she'd taught David to make pancakes on Saturday mornings, where he'd done his homework while she cooked dinner and I read the paper. Upstairs, our bedroom still held the faint scent of her perfume. I'd kept her clothes in the closet, her jewelry in the box I'd made for her 30th birthday. Not because I thought she was coming back, but because getting rid of them felt like erasing the proof that we'd existed together. In David's old room, I found the photo albums Margaret had meticulously maintained, pictures of birthday parties and little league games, family vacations and school plays, David grinning gap-toothed in his baseball uniform, David serious and proud in his graduation cap, David dancing with Jennifer at their wedding, both of them young and beautiful and full of plans. When had he stopped being that boy? When had the light in his eyes dimmed into calculation? I closed the album and walked to the window that looked out over the backyard. Margaret's roses were struggling without her expert care, but they still bloomed every spring, like a promise she'd made to the earth itself. Beyond them, the old oak tree where David had built a treehouse with his grandfather, where he'd learned to climb before he learned to fall. $200,000, 3 months behind, people who weren't known for their patience. I thought about the safe upstairs, about the deed that said this house belonged to Margaret and me, and now just to me. About the will I'd written after she died, leaving everything to David because he was my only child, and I'd assumed that meant something. The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. I let it go to the machine, listening to Margaret's voice on the outgoing message we'd never bothered to change. After the beep, David's voice filled the quiet house. Dad, I forgot to mention something. Jennifer's parents are planning to drive up this weekend to look at the house. You know, just to get a feel for the space, to see how everyone might fit together. I hope that's okay. We'll bring lunch. The message ended with a click that echoed through the empty rooms. I stood there for a long moment, processing what I'd just heard. David hadn't asked for my permission. He'd informed me of plans that were already in motion, as if my agreement was a foregone conclusion, as if the house was already changing hands, and I just hadn't signed the papers yet. I walked to Margaret's desk in the corner of the living room, where she'd kept our important documents organized in neat manila folders. Insurance papers, medical records, investment statements. And there, in the folder marked House, the deed that proved this place belonged to me, and me alone. I pulled out the document and read it carefully, noting the precise legal language that defined property lines and ownership rights. Then I reached for the phone book and looked up a number I hadn't called in 15 years. Marcus Webb, attorney at law. The man who'd handled Margaret's will and my legal affairs for decades. A man who understood the difference between what was right and what was legal and knew when those two things diverged. Marcus? It's Thomas Richardson. I need to schedule an appointment. Something's come up that requires careful attention. As I hung up the phone, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. Still the same weathered face, still the same steady eyes that had seen 40 years of marriage and 3 years of widowhood. But something had shifted behind those eyes, something that hadn't been there when I'd poured my morning coffee. David thought he was dealing with a lonely old man who'd roll over and hand him the keys to his inheritance. He was about to learn he'd miscalculated the foundation he was building his future on. Outside, a cardinal landed on Margaret's rosebush, its red feathers bright against the pale pink blooms. Margaret always said cardinals were messages from heaven, visits from the people we'd lost. I didn't know if I believed that, but I watched the bird for a long moment before it flew away, carrying whatever message it had come to deliver. The morning was still young, and I had phone calls to make. Marcus Webb's office hadn't changed in the 15 years since I'd last sat across from his mahogany desk. The same law books lined the walls, their leather spines worn from decades of consultation. The same grandfather clock ticked in the corner, keeping time with the deliberate patience of a man who'd spent his career untangling other people's mistakes. Marcus himself had aged gracefully, his silver hair now completely white, his eyes still sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd handled Margaret's estate with the kind of careful attention that made you trust him with your life's work. "Thomas," he said, rising to shake my hand. "I was sorry to hear about David's visit yesterday. Difficult situation." I'd given him the basics over the phone: David's debt, the pressure to sell, the assumption that I'd simply hand over my home to solve his problems. Marcus had listened without judgment, the way good lawyers do when they're calculating angles. "What are my options?" Marcus opened a manila folder, thick with documents. "Legally, the house is yours free and clear. David has no claim to it unless you choose to give him one. However," he paused, adjusting his glasses, "if he's used your property as collateral without your knowledge, that's a different matter entirely." The words hit me like cold water. "What do you mean?" I pulled the county records after our call. There are some irregularities. A second mortgage filed 18 months ago with your signature on the documents. I felt the blood drain from my face. "That's impossible. I never signed anything." Marcus slid a photocopy across the desk. There, in black and white, was my signature on a loan document for $250,000. The handwriting looked like mine, but I had no memory of signing it. "The signature appears authentic to a casual observer," Marcus said carefully, "but there are inconsistencies in the pen pressure, slight variations in letter formation. If I had to guess, I'd say someone traced your signature from another document." "David?" "That's not for me to determine, but Thomas, if the signature was forged, your son is facing more than financial difficulties. He's looking at felony fraud charges." I stared at the document, seeing David's desperate face from yesterday morning. 3 months behind on payments. People who weren't known for their patience. He hadn't just gotten himself into debt, he'd stolen my house to do it. "What happens now?" "That depends on what you want to happen. We can report the fraud, have the loan declared invalid. David would face criminal charges, but your property would be protected." I thought about Margaret's voice on our answering machine, about the boy who'd built a treehouse in our backyard, about the man who'd looked me in the eye yesterday and asked me to save him from the consequences of his own choices. "I need to think about this." "Of course, but Thomas, don't think too long. If David defaults on this loan, the bank can move to foreclose. Fraud or not, that process takes time to stop once it starts." Driving home, I took the long way past the lake where Margaret and I used to fish on Sunday afternoons. The water was mirror still, reflecting the autumn sky like polished glass. She'd love this view, especially in October, when the leaves turned gold and red and the air carried the promise of winter. I pulled into the empty parking lot and sat in my truck, engine ticking as it cooled. Margaret had been gone 3 years, but I could still hear her voice as clearly as if she were sitting beside me. "That boy has been making bad choices since he was 16, she'd said after David's 3rd speeding ticket. "You keep bailing him out, Tom, and he'll never learn to swim on his own." But I had bailed him out. The speeding tickets, the credit card debt in college, the down payment for his first house. Every time, I'd told myself it was temporary help, that David would pay me back when he got on his feet. The checks had stopped coming years ago, but I'd stopped asking for them. Family was family, and money was just money. Now David had taken something that couldn't be replaced: my trust, my security, my home. The place where Margaret had died, where her memory lived in every corner and shadow. My phone buzzed, a text from David. "Looking forward to this weekend. Jennifer's parents are excited to see the house. Dad, I can't thank you enough for being open to this." I stared at the message, reading between the lines. David wasn't asking for my permission. He was informing me of plans already in motion. In his mind, I'd already agreed to sell. The visit this weekend was just a formality, a chance for Jennifer's parents to start making their own plans for my home. I thought about the treehouse rotting in our backyard, about the workshop where I'd built Margaret's jewelry box, about the bedroom where we'd held each other through 47 years of marriage. I thought about David's signature traced over mine, about papers filed without my knowledge, about the boy I'd raised becoming a man I barely recognized. The drive home passed in a blur of familiar streets and autumn colors. Our house sat at the end of Maple Street like it had for 32 years, the white clapboard siding glowing in the afternoon sun. Margaret's roses struggled in their beds, but they still bloomed, still reached toward the light, despite my clumsy attempts at care. Inside, the answering machine was blinking. 3 messages. The first was from Jennifer, her voice bright with false cheer. "Hi, Dad. Just wanted to confirm this weekend's plans. Mom and Dad are so excited to see the house. We're thinking about arriving around noon on Saturday. Hope that works for you." Dad. She'd started calling me Dad 2 years into her marriage to David, but it had always felt forced, like a costume that didn't quite fit. Now it sounded like possession, like she was already measuring my life for alterations. The second message was from a number I didn't recognize. A woman's voice, professional but tired. "Mr. Richardson, this is Carol from Midwest Financial Services. We need to discuss your account status. Please call us at your earliest convenience." The mortgage company. The people David owed money to, calling to discuss the house they thought they owned a piece of. The third message made my blood run cold. "Tom, it's David. Listen, I know this is awkward, but the bank called today. They're accelerating the loan process because of some missed payments. We might need to move faster on the house sale than we originally planned. Can you call me back? It's important." Accelerating the loan process, moving faster. David was running out of time, and he expected me to solve his problem by sacrificing my home. I walked through the house slowly, seeing it through new eyes. The living room where David had opened Christmas presents. The dining room where we'd celebrated his birthdays and graduations. The kitchen where Margaret had taught him to cook. Where he'd done homework while she hummed and stirred pots on the stove. In David's old bedroom, I found the photo album again. Pictures of a boy who'd climbed trees and caught fireflies and believed his father could fix anything. When had that boy become the man who'd forge my signature? When had love become leverage? I sat on David's old bed, surrounded by the ghosts of better days. On the nightstand was a framed photo from his high school graduation. David in cap and gown, Margaret and me on either side, all of us grinning at the camera. We'd been so proud that day, so certain that all our sacrifice and guidance had shaped him into someone worthy of our trust. The boy in that photo wouldn't have stolen from his parents, but the man who'd sat in my living room yesterday, desperate and calculating, was capable of exactly that. My phone rang. David's number. "Hi, son." "Dad, did you get my message about the bank?" "I got it. We need to talk. Tonight, if possible. This situation is moving faster than I expected, and we need to get ahead of it. Get ahead of it. As if this were some natural disaster we were all facing together, instead of a hole David had dug himself into, using my property as his shovel. "Come over after dinner. We'll talk." "Thanks, Dad. I knew you'd understand. We're family, right? We look out for each other." Family. The word tasted bitter now, like coffee left too long on the burner. After David hung up, I called Marcus Webb at home. "I need that fraud investigation started immediately," I told him. "And Marcus, I want to know every legal option I have to protect this house." "Are you sure, Thomas? Once we start this process, there's no going back. David will face serious consequences." I looked around the living room, where Margaret had arranged our furniture just so, where she'd hung the family photos and chosen the curtains and made a house into a home. I thought about David's forged signature, about his assumption that I'd simply hand over my life's work to fix his mistakes. He made his choice when he signed my name to that loan. Now, I'm making mine. That evening, as the sun set behind Margaret's struggling roses, I sat in my chair and waited for my son to arrive. On the side table next to me was a manila folder Marcus had prepared, copies of the fraudulent documents, evidence of David's deception, legal papers that would change everything. David thought he was coming to discuss our family's future. He had no idea he was walking into the wreckage of everything we'd once been to each other. Outside, a cardinal landed on the oak tree where his childhood treehouse still clung to the branches, weathered and forgotten. Margaret always said cardinals brought messages from heaven. If she was trying to tell me something, I hoped it was that she'd understand what I was about to do. Because tomorrow, David would learn that some foundations couldn't be rebuilt once they'd been broken. David arrived at 7:30 with a manila folder of his own, and the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. He'd changed out of his expensive suit into khakis and a polo shirt, the uniform of a man trying to look approachable while asking for everything you owned. "Dad, thanks for agreeing to meet tonight. I know this is all happening fast." I gestured toward the sofa. the same spot where he'd sat yesterday morning to confess his desperation. The evening light slanted through Margaret's lace curtains, casting shadows that made the familiar room feel like a stage set for something neither of us wanted to perform. Coffee? No, I'm good. He set his folder on the coffee table with the careful precision of a man who'd rehearsed this moment. I brought some paperwork, just preliminary stuff, nothing binding. But I thought you might want to see what we're looking at. What we're looking at. As if this were a partnership instead of a hostage situation. I settled into my chair, the manila folder from Marcus Webb hidden behind the lamp on the side table. Show me what you got. David opened his folder and spread documents across Margaret's coffee table like he was dealing cards. Real estate listings for retirement communities, financial projections, a market analysis for our neighborhood. Everything professional and clean and designed to make his proposal look like sound financial planning instead of desperation. This place in Clearwater Village looks perfect for you, he said, sliding a glossy brochure across the table. Independent living, but with medical care available if you need it. Golf course, swimming pool, organized activities. Dad, you'd love it there. I picked up the brochure and studied the smiling faces of elderly people playing cards and tending garden plots no bigger than Margaret's rose bed. Everyone looked content in that artificial way of advertising photography, like they'd found happiness by giving up everything that had once defined them. What's it cost? $200,000 for a 2-bedroom unit. But Dad, that's the beauty of this plan. You sell this house, buy the condo, and still have money left over. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life. And enough to solve David's problem. He didn't say it, but the math was simple enough. Our house was worth close to $600,000. After buying his retirement paradise, I'd have $400,000 left. More than enough to clear his debts and set Jennifer's parents up in their own place. And you'd handle the sale? David's face brightened like I'd offered him salvation. Of course, I know the market. I have contacts in real estate. Dad, I'd make sure you get top dollar for this place. I thought about the forged signature Marcus had shown me, about David's name on loan documents I'd never seen, about trust broken and rebuilt on lies. What about Jennifer's parents? Where would they fit into this arrangement? Well, that's the other part of the plan. David pulled out another sheet of paper, this one covered with his handwriting. If you were open to it, they could take over this house. Keep it in the family, you know? They'd handle the mortgage payments, take care of the maintenance. Everyone wins. Everyone wins. David gets his debts cleared, Jennifer's parents get a house they could never afford on their own. And I get shipped off to a retirement community to play shuffleboard with strangers while the home Margaret and I built becomes someone else's story. And the mortgage, the one you're 3 months behind on? David's smile faltered for just a second. How did you... He caught himself, forced the expression back into place. Dad, that's part of why we need to move quickly. The bank is getting impatient, but if we can show them a clear plan for resolution, they'll work with us. What exactly would Jennifer's parents be paying off? What's the balance on that mortgage? It's complicated. There are some fees, some penalties for late payments. But, Dad, the important thing is that everyone gets what they need. You get security, we get stability, and the house stays in the family. I reached for the folder Marcus had prepared and set it on my lap, not opening it yet. David, I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth. Of course. Did you forge my signature on loan documents? The color drained from his face like water from a broken glass. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again without producing sound. In that moment of silence, I saw everything I needed to know. Dad, I can explain. So you did. It wasn't like that. It was supposed to be temporary, just to buy some time. I was going to pay it back before you ever knew about it. $250,000, David. You stole $250,000 using my house as collateral. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window that looked out on Margaret's garden. I was desperate. The business was failing, and Jennifer's parents needed help. And I thought I could fix everything before anyone got hurt. Anyone got hurt? I opened Marcus's folder and pulled out the photocopy of the loan documents. David, if you default on this loan, I lose my house. The house your mother and I worked 40 years to pay off. The house where she died. He turned from the window, his face twisted with guilt and defiance. That's why we need to sell it. Dad, don't you see? This is the solution. You sell the house, clear the debt, everybody starts fresh. Everybody except me. You'd be fine. Better than fine. Dad, you'd be free from all this responsibility. All these memories that are keeping you stuck in the past. Stuck in the past. As if Margaret's memory were a burden, instead of the only thing that made my present bearable. These memories are all I have left of 47 years of marriage, son. This house isn't just real estate to me. It's where your mother taught you to ride a bicycle in the driveway, where she bandaged your scraped knees and helped you with your homework, where we held you when you had nightmares. David's jaw tightened. Mom's gone, Dad. She's been gone for 3 years. Holding on to this place isn't going to bring her back. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not because they were cruel, but because they revealed how little my son understood about love, about loss, about the way a shared life leaves traces in every corner of the place where it was lived. You're right, I said quietly. Your mother is gone, but this house is where I can still feel her presence, where I can remember not just how she died, but how she lived. Dad, I'm not finished. I stood, the folder heavy in my hands. You forged my signature, David. You stole from me. And now you want me to solve the problem you created by giving up the only thing I have left that matters. It's not stealing if I was going to pay it back. But you weren't going to pay it back, were you? You've been 3 months behind on payments, and instead of coming to me honestly, you've been planning this elaborate scheme to trick me into selling. David sank back onto the sofa, his head in his hands. I'm drowning, Dad. We're all drowning. Jennifer's parents lost their house last year. That's why they're living with us. Jennifer's hours got cut at work. And the business? God, the business is barely hanging on. For a moment, he looked like the boy who used to confess his mistakes at this same spot, waiting for punishment and hoping for forgiveness. But the boy I'd raised wouldn't have stolen from his parents. The boy I'd raised wouldn't have forged signatures and filed false documents and built his salvation on someone else's destruction. When did you stop being my son and start being someone I don't recognize? The question hung in the air between us like smoke. David looked up, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and something that might have been shame. When I realized that being your son wasn't enough to keep my family from falling apart. The honesty of it cut deeper than any lie could have. I thought about all the times I'd helped David out of smaller troubles, all the checks I'd written and loans I'd co-signed and problems I'd solved with my wallet instead of teaching him to solve them himself. Maybe Margaret had been right all those years ago. Maybe I'd taught him to expect rescue instead of responsibility. What happens if I don't sell the house? David's face hardened. Then we all go down together. The bank forecloses, you lose the house anyway, and I end up in prison for fraud. Is that what you want? Is protecting your memories worth destroying what's left of our family? I looked around the living room where Margaret had arranged our life just so, where every piece of furniture held a story, where every shadow carried the weight of shared years. I thought about David's forged signature, about Jennifer's parents measuring my home for their own purposes, about the retirement community where I'd be surrounded by strangers playing cards and pretending contentment. I need time to think about this. Dad, we don't have time. The bank. I said I need time. David gathered his papers with sharp, angry movements. Fine, but Dad, don't take too long. Some problems can't wait for you to decide whether or not you want to face them. After he left, I sat in the gathering darkness and listened to the house settle around me, the tick of Margaret's grandfather clock, the whisper of air through the vents, the distant hum of the refrigerator where our leftover anniversary cake still sat, 3 years after our last celebration. I opened Marcus's folder again and read through the evidence of David's deception. Bank documents, signature analyses, legal opinions, everything I needed to protect my house and send my son to prison. On the coffee table, David's brochures for retirement communities caught the lamplight. Smiling faces, organized activities, medical care available when needed. Everything designed to convince me that giving up my life was the same as gaining freedom. I walked upstairs to the bedroom Margaret and I had shared for 32 years. Her clothes still hung in the closet, her jewelry still filled the box I had made for her birthday. On the nightstand, her reading glasses sat next to the bookmark in the romance novel she'd never finished. Tomorrow, Jennifer's parents would arrive to look at my house like it was already theirs. David would watch my face for signs of surrender, calculating how much of my sacrifice he needed to solve his problems. But I'd made my decision somewhere between David's confession and his threat, somewhere between the forged signature and the retirement home brochures. I wasn't going to be the solution to problems I hadn't created. I wasn't going to let my son's desperation erase 40 years of careful building. I picked up the phone and dialed Marcus Webb's home number. "Marcus, it's Thomas. I want you to file that fraud report first thing Monday morning, and I want to explore every legal option to protect this house." "Are you sure, Thomas? Once we start this process, I'm sure. David made his choice when he signed my name to those papers. Now I'm making mine." After I hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed Margaret and I had shared and looked at the framed photo on my nightstand, our wedding day, both of us young and certain that love was enough to build a life on. We'd been right about that, but we'd never imagined that the life we built might one day be threatened by the child we'd raised together. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the windows Margaret had cleaned every spring until they sparkled like promises. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, legal papers, the end of whatever relationship David and I had pretended to maintain. But tonight, I was still in the house we'd built together, surrounded by the proof that some things were worth more than money, more than convenience, more than solving other people's problems with your own sacrifice. Tomorrow, David would learn that foundations matter, and some foundations couldn't be rebuilt once they'd been broken by the very people they were meant to support. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of October day that warns you winter isn't a suggestion. I'd been awake since 5, sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee and Marcus's folder spread before me like battle plans. The fraud report would be filed Monday morning. By Tuesday, David would be facing criminal charges. But first, I had to survive this weekend's performance. At 11:30, I heard the crunch of gravel in the driveway. Through Margaret's lace curtains, I watched David's BMW pull up, followed by a white Cadillac that screamed retirement fund and entitlement. 4 doors opened simultaneously, and out stepped the invasion force. David emerged first, his smile bright and false as a game show host. Jennifer followed, her blonde hair perfect despite the wind, wearing the kind of casual outfit that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. From the Cadillac came her parents, Gerald with his silver hair and country club posture, Patricia clutching her leather handbag like armor. They moved up my front walk like they owned it, like this was already their property, and I was just the caretaker waiting to be dismissed. I opened the door before they could knock. "Dad!" Jennifer's voice carried that artificial warmth she'd perfected for family gatherings. "Thank you so much for having us. Mom and Dad are so excited to see the house." Gerald stepped forward with his businessman's handshake, the kind designed to establish dominance. "Tom, good to see you again. Beautiful property you have here." Patricia offered her cheek for a kiss I pretended not to notice. "Thomas, you look wonderful. And this house. My goodness, it's even lovelier than David described." They filed past me into the hallway, their eyes already cataloging, measuring, planning. Gerald's gaze lingered on the hardwood floors Margaret and I had refinished ourselves one humid summer. Patricia studied the family photos lining the walls, her expression calculating rather than sentimental. "Coffee, anyone?" I offered, though hospitality felt like betrayal of everything Margaret had taught me about welcoming guests. "That would be lovely," Patricia said, settling onto my sofa like she was testing it for comfort. What a charming living room. So much potential. Potential. The word real estate agents used when they meant everything would need to be changed. I brought coffee on Margaret's good china, the set she'd saved for special occasions. If this wasn't special enough, the day strangers came to appraise my life's work, nothing would be. Gerald stirred his coffee with the precision of a man accustomed to being served. "Tom, David's told us about your situation, rattling around in this big house all alone. Must be lonely?" I manage. "Of course you do. But managing and thriving are different things, aren't they?" Patricia's smile was practiced, professional. At our age, we need to think about what's practical, not just what's sentimental. Our age. Patricia was maybe 65, a decade younger than me, but she spoke like we were fellow inmates in some assisted living facility. "Mind if we look around?" Gerald was already standing, his coffee barely touched. "David's given us the grand tour in theory, but seeing it firsthand, of course." I stood, feeling like a tour guide in my own home. Where would you like to start? They moved through my house like prospective buyers, which I suppose they were. Gerald tested the hardness of the floors with his heel, checked the windows for drafts, examined the crown molding I'd installed myself 20 years ago. Patricia opened cabinets, peered into closets, measured spaces with her eyes. In the kitchen, she ran her fingers along the countertops Margaret had chosen, grain by grain. These could be updated easily enough. Granite would be more practical than this old butcher block. The butcher block where Margaret had kneaded bread every Sunday, where I'd learned to chop vegetables under her patient instruction, where we'd shared quiet conversations over morning coffee for 32 years. The appliances are quite old, Gerald observed, opening my refrigerator like it was public property. Everything would need to be replaced. I thought about the refrigerator that had hummed faithfully through 3 decades, covered with David's childhood artwork, Margaret's shopping lists, appointment cards from doctors who'd tried to give us more time together. Upstairs, they examined the bedrooms with the detached interest of hotel inspectors. Patricia stood in the doorway of the master bedroom where Margaret had died, where her reading glasses still sat on the nightstand next to her unfinished novel. This would make a lovely sitting room, she mused, much more practical than keeping it as a bedroom. At our age, who needs 3 bedrooms anyway? A sitting room, where Margaret and I had held each other through 47 years of marriage, where she'd taken her last breath while I held her hand and promised to remember everything. David appeared beside me in the hallway. Dad, what do you think? Can you see them being happy here? I looked at Gerald testing the bathroom fixtures, at Patricia mentally rearranging furniture Margaret had chosen with such care. I thought about the forged signature in Marcus's folder, about the fraud report that would be filed Monday morning. I can see them making themselves at home, I said. In David's old room, Patricia discovered the photo albums Margaret had maintained so meticulously. She flipped through pages of birthday parties and Christmas mornings, family vacations, and school plays. How sweet, she said, closing the album like it was homework. You'll want to take these with you, of course, along with whatever other personal items fit in your new space. Personal items? 40 years of marriage reduced to whatever would fit in a retirement community apartment. We ended the tour in the basement workshop, where I had built Margaret's jewelry box, where David had learned to hold a hammer properly, where the smell of sawdust and wood stains still lingered like memory itself. Gerald examined my tools with the appreciation of a man who'd never built anything with his hands. Quite a collection. These would bring good money at an estate sale. Estate sale. As if I were already dead and my life was ready for auction. Back in the living room, they settled onto my furniture with the satisfaction of people who'd found exactly what they'd hoped for. Gerald crossed his legs, Patricia smoothed her skirt, David perched on the edge of his chair like a salesman waiting for the close. Well, Tom, Gerald said, I have to say, this place exceeds expectations. Patricia and I could be very comfortable here. The bones are excellent, Patricia agreed. And with some updating, new appliances, fresh paint, maybe hardwood in the kitchen, it could be quite spectacular. I thought about Margaret choosing every paint color, about the hardwood floors we'd installed ourselves, about the kitchen where she'd taught David to make pancakes on Saturday mornings. Of course, we'd want to handle the transition gradually, Gerald continued. Give you time to sort through your belongings, decide what to keep and what to let go. Let go. Like Margaret's memory was clutter to be discarded. Jennifer leaned forward, her voice gentle with false concern. Dad, we know this is emotional, but think about the freedom you'd have. No more worrying about maintenance, about yard work, about being alone if something happens. Something happens, like the heart attack that had landed me in the hospital 18 months ago, when David had hovered over my bed, looking more concerned about the future than my recovery. And financially, David added, this makes sense for everyone. You'd have enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life, plus help us get back on our feet. There it was, the truth wrapped in concern, tied with ribbons of family obligation. What's the timeline you're thinking about? I asked. The 4 of them exchanged glances. Gerald cleared his throat. Well, given the circumstances with the bank, sooner would be better than later. If we could have papers drawn up by early next week, while Marcus's fraud report was being processed, while David's forgery was being investigated, while criminal charges were being prepared. That seems fast. Dad, David's voice carried an edge of desperation he was trying to mask as urgency. The bank isn't going to wait forever. If we can show them a clear resolution plan, they'll work with us. But if we let this drag out... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The threat was clear enough. Patricia reached into her leather handbag and pulled out a manila folder. We've taken the liberty of having our attorney prepare some preliminary paperwork. Nothing binding, just a framework for the transaction. She spread documents across Margaret's coffee table like she was dealing cards. Purchase agreements, property transfers, financial arrangements. Everything professional and legal and designed to make theft look like family planning. Of course, you'll want your own attorney to review these, Gerald said magnanimously. I picked up the purchase agreement and read the proposed sale price, $400,000. $200,000 less than the house was worth, but enough to clear David's debts and set Gerald and Patricia up in the home they couldn't afford on their own. This seems low, I said. David shifted uncomfortably. Dad, we're family. And given the circumstances, the time pressure, we thought it was fair. Fair. Like stealing my house at below market value was some kind of generous offer. I set the papers down carefully, thinking about the fraud report in Marcus's folder, about the criminal charges that would be filed Monday morning, about the choice I'd already made. I need to think about this. Gerald's smile tightened. Of course. But Tom, given the legal situation David's facing, time really is of the essence. The legal situation David's facing. They knew about the forged signature, about the mortgage fraud, about the criminal charges hanging over my son's head. This wasn't family helping family. This was blackmail wrapped in real estate documents. How long do I have? End of business Monday would be ideal, Patricia said smoothly. Our attorney could have the final papers ready by then. Monday. The same day Marcus would file the fraud report that would destroy David's freedom along with his financial future. I'll let you know Monday morning. After they left, I sat in my chair and looked at the purchase agreement scattered across Margaret's coffee table. $400,000 for the house we'd built together, the life we'd shared, the memories that defined who I'd become in the 32 years since we'd carried our furniture through that front door. I gathered the papers and carried them upstairs to the bedroom, where Margaret's presence still lingered in the scent of her perfume, the indent her head had left in her pillow, the bookmark in the romance novel she'd never finished. On Monday morning, Marcus would file charges that would send David to prison. Gerald and Patricia would lose their dream of retirement funded by other people's sacrifice. Jennifer would discover that her parents' financial planning had been built on quicksand. But tonight, I was still in the house Margaret and I had made together, surrounded by the proof that some things couldn't be measured in market value or appraised by strangers who saw potential where I saw home. I picked up the phone and called Marcus Webb. Marcus, it's Thomas. Monday morning, I want you to do more than file that fraud report. I want you to make sure this house is protected from any future claims. Transfer it to a trust, put it in my sister's name, donate it to charity, whatever it takes to make sure David can never touch it again. Thomas, are you certain? Once we take these steps, I'm certain, David forged my signature and tried to steal my house. Now he wants me to solve his problem by giving him exactly what he tried to take. But, Marcus, some things aren't for sale. Some things are worth more than solving other people's mistakes. After I hung up, I walked through my house slowly, seeing it as if for the first time. Every room held stories only I remembered now. Every corner carried the weight of shared years, of love lived daily in small moments and quiet gestures. Tomorrow would bring consequences David couldn't imagine. But tonight, I was home. Monday morning broke clear and cold, the kind of autumn day that makes promises about winter. I was dressed and drinking coffee by 6:30, watching the sun climb through Margaret's lace curtains and feeling the weight of what was about to unfold. In 3 hours, Marcus would file the fraud report. By noon, David's world would begin its collapse. The phone rang at 7:15. David's number. Dad, good morning. Listen, I wanted to touch base before you make your decision about the house. Gerald and Patricia are really hoping we can move forward today. His voice carried that forced cheerfulness of a man whistling past his own graveyard. I've made my decision, son. That's great. I knew you'd see reason. Dad, This is going to be good for everyone, a fresh start all around. I let him build his castle of assumptions while I sipped coffee from the mug Margaret had given me for our 20th anniversary. 20 years together, she'd said then, and 20 more if we're lucky. We'd gotten 27 more, but even that hadn't been enough. David, I need you to come over this morning, around 10. Of course. Should I bring Gerald and Patricia? They'll want to get the paperwork signed as soon as possible. Just you, son, just you. After I hung up, I walked through the house one more time, seeing it through the lens of everything that was about to change. The living room where David would learn that theft has consequences. The dining room where we'd celebrated his achievements before he started celebrating other people's failures. The kitchen where Margaret had taught him right from wrong, lessons he'd apparently forgotten in his desperation. At 9:30, I called Marcus to confirm our plans. "The fraud report is ready to file," he said. "Thomas, are you absolutely certain about this? Once these charges are filed, there's no taking them back." "I'm certain. What about the house?" "I've prepared a trust document that will transfer ownership to the Margaret Richardson Memorial Trust, with you as the sole trustee for life. After your death, the property goes to the American Cancer Society in your wife's name. No one will ever be able to claim it or use it as collateral again. The Margaret Richardson Memorial Trust." Even in legal documents, her name carried weight, carried purpose. She'd died fighting cancer with a dignity that humbled everyone who knew her. Now her memory would protect the home we'd built together from the son who'd tried to steal it. Perfect. "Thomas, David will contest this. He'll claim undue influence, diminished capacity, anything his lawyer thinks might work. Let him try. I've been making sound financial decisions for 70 years. I think I can handle one more." At exactly 10 o'clock, David's BMW pulled into the driveway. He emerged wearing his best suit, carrying a leather briefcase, moving with the confidence of a man who thought he'd already won. He had no idea he was walking into his own sentencing. I opened the door before he could knock. "Dad, beautiful morning." His smile was brilliant, victorious. "Ready to start our new chapter?" "Come in, son. We need to talk." He settled onto the sofa where Gerald and Patricia had planned their invasion just 2 days ago. The coffee table was clear now, except for a manila folder I'd placed precisely in the center. "I brought the final paperwork," David said, patting his briefcase. "Gerald's attorney did a beautiful job, clean, simple, fair to everyone. Before we look at your papers, I want you to see mine." I opened the folder and removed the photocopy of the forged mortgage documents Marcus had shown me. David's face went white as I slid them across the table. "Where did you get these?" "From the county records office. Amazing what's available to the public when you know where to look." David stared at the documents like they were written in a language he didn't understand. "Dad, I can explain." "No need. Marcus Webb has already explained everything to the district attorney's office." The words hit him like a physical blow. He actually rocked back on the sofa, his briefcase sliding to the floor with a leather thud. "The district attorney?" "Mortgage fraud is a felony, David. Forgery is a felony. Using someone else's property as collateral without their knowledge is a felony. You've managed to commit 3 serious crimes in the space of 18 months. Dad, please. I was desperate. I was going to pay it back." "With what?" "You're 3 months behind on payments, your business is failing, and you've been planning to steal my house to solve problems you created." David's hands shook as he reached for the documents. "You can't do this. I'm your son. You were my son. Right up until you decided I was easier to rob than respect." I pulled out the second set of papers, the trust documents Marcus had prepared. "The Margaret Richardson Memorial Trust now owns this house. You'll never be able to claim it, use it as collateral, or force me to sell it. When I die, it goes to charity in your mother's name." David scanned the papers with growing horror. "You can't do this. I'll contest it. I'll claim you're not competent to make these decisions." "You're welcome to try, but David, I've been making sound financial decisions since before you were born. I built a successful business, paid off this house, and saved enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life. That doesn't sound like incompetence to me." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window where Margaret's roses struggled in their beds. "Dad, if you file these charges, I'll go to prison. Is that what you want? Your son in prison?" The question hung between us like smoke. I thought about the boy who'd learned to ride a bicycle in this driveway, who'd brought Margaret dandelions and called them flowers, who'd sat at this same table doing homework while she cooked dinner. I want my son back, but that boy disappeared sometime between learning right from wrong and deciding theft was easier than honesty. I'm still that boy. I just made some mistakes. Mistakes are accidental, David. Forgery is intentional. You planned this. You researched it. You calculated exactly how much my house was worth and decided to take it. David turned from the window, his face twisted with desperation. What about Jennifer? What about her parents? They're innocent in this. Jennifer's parents came into my house and planned its renovation while I was sitting right there. They knew exactly what they were doing. And Jennifer? I thought about my daughter-in-law, about her artificial warmth and calculated smiles, about the way she'd called me dad while measuring my life for alterations. Jennifer married you. She's chosen to stand by your decisions. Now she gets to live with the consequences. David sank back onto the sofa, his head in his hands. Dad, please. There has to be another way. There was another way. You could have come to me honestly. You could have asked for help instead of trying to steal what you wanted. You could have treated me like your father instead of your Mark. I was ashamed. I didn't want you to know how badly I'd failed. So instead, you decided to make me pay for your failure. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10:30. In Marcus's office downtown, legal documents were being filed that would change everything. Phone calls were being made to law enforcement. The machinery of justice was grinding into motion. What happens now? David asked quietly. Now you face the consequences of your choices. The district attorney will review the case and decide on charges. You'll be arrested, probably sometime this week. After that, I shrugged. After that, you'll learn what it's like to lose everything that matters. David looked up, his eyes red with something that might have been tears or might have been rage. You're destroying our family? I'm protecting what's left of it. This house, your mother's memory, the values she tried to teach you. She wouldn't want this. Mom wouldn't want her son in prison. The mention of Margaret cut deep, the way David knew it would. But I thought about her voice during David's teenage years, warning me that bailing him out would teach him to expect rescue instead of responsibility. Your mother wanted you to be a man of character, someone who solved his problems honestly, who treated family with respect, who understood that some things aren't for sale. I gestured around the living room, where Margaret had arranged our life just so. She'd be heartbroken to see what you've become, but she'd understand what I had to do. David gathered his briefcase with sharp, angry movements. This isn't over, Dad. I'll fight this. I'll prove you're not competent to make these decisions. Good luck with that. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking back at the house where he'd grown up, where Margaret had bandaged his scraped knees and helped him with homework and taught him the difference between right and wrong. I hope it was worth it, he said finally. I hope keeping this old house was worth losing your son. I didn't lose my son, David. You lost yourself. Somewhere between the boy who brought your mother dandelions and the man who forged my signature, you became someone I don't recognize. After he left, I sat in the quiet house and listened to the sounds that had become my companions. The tick of Margaret's grandfather clock, the whisper of air through the vents, the distant hum of the refrigerator where her shopping lists still clung to the door. The phone rang at 11:15. Marcus Webb. It's done, Thomas. The fraud report has been filed. The trust documents are recorded. Legally, you're protected from any further claims on the property. And David? A warrant will be issued by the end of the week. Given the evidence, I'd expect charges of mortgage fraud, forgery, and grand theft. He's looking at significant prison time. I thought about visiting days in some sterile facility, about sitting across from my son while guards watched and time ran out, and we searched for words that might bridge the gap between who he'd been and who he'd become. Thank you, Marcus. Thomas, you did the right thing. Family or not, theft is theft. After I hung up, I walked upstairs to the bedroom where Margaret's reading glasses still sat on the nightstand. I picked up the romance novel she'd never finished and found her bookmark on page 247. She'd been so close to the end, to whatever happy ending the author had planned for characters who'd faced their own trials and found their way to love. I placed the bookmark carefully on the page where she'd stopped reading and closed the book. Some stories didn't get finished the way you hoped. Some endings arrived before you were ready for them. But other stories continued. The story of this house, protected now by legal documents that would keep it safe from future predators. The story of Margaret's memory, honored by the trust that bore her name. The story of a man who'd learned that sometimes love meant saying no, even when saying yes might be easier. Outside, a cardinal landed on the oak tree where David had once built a treehouse. Margaret always said cardinals were messages from heaven, visits from the people we'd lost. I didn't know if I believed that, but I watched the bird for a long moment before it flew away. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: David's arrest, the legal proceedings, the collapse of whatever relationship we'd pretended to maintain. But today, I was exactly where I belonged, in the house Margaret and I had built together, surrounded by the proof that some things were worth more than money, more than family peace, more than solving other people's problems with your own sacrifice. The cardinal returned, perching on Margaret's rosebush, where a few late blooms still caught the morning light. If it was carrying a message, I hoped it was one of approval, because for the first time in 3 years, I felt like the man she'd married, someone who understood the difference between love and enabling, between family loyalty and self-destruction. The morning was still young, and I had the rest of my life to figure out what came next. The arrest came on Thursday morning while I was having coffee and reading the obituaries, a habit Margaret had always found morbid, but I'd grown to appreciate. There's something reassuring about seeing your name absent from the day's final roll call. I heard the sirens first, distant but growing closer, then the crunch of multiple vehicles in a driveway that wasn't mine. Through Margaret's lace curtains, I could see the red and blue lights reflecting off the houses across the street. David lived 4 blocks over, close enough that the neighborhood drama would reach me before the newspapers did. The phone rang at 8:30, Jennifer's voice high and tight with panic. And, "Dad, they arrested David. The police came to the house with a warrant. They handcuffed him in front of the neighbors, put him in a police car like he was some kind of criminal." He was some kind of criminal. 3 kinds, actually. But I didn't say that to the woman who was watching her husband disappear into the justice system I'd set in motion. "Where are you now?" "At the police station. They won't let me see him. They said he's being processed, whatever that means." Her voice cracked. "Dad, what's happening? What did you do?" What did I do? As if protecting my own property from theft was the crime here. "I filed a complaint about forged documents, Jennifer. The rest is up to the legal system." "Forged documents? Dad, David would never." She stopped, and I could hear the moment when reality punctured her denial. "Oh God, the mortgage, the papers he had me sign as a witness." "You witnessed his signature on loan documents?" Silence stretched across the line like a held breath. When Jennifer spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "I thought they were refinancing papers. David said you'd asked him to handle some financial arrangements, that you were having trouble managing things since Mom died." Another lie, another layer of deception. David had used his wife as an unwitting accomplice, convincing her that his theft was actually caretaking. "Jennifer, I never asked David to handle anything. Those papers you witnessed, they were mortgage applications using my house as collateral without my knowledge or consent. But he said you were getting forgetful, that you'd asked him to take care of things, but then forgotten about it. Forgetful. The word every elderly person learns to fear. The accusation that strips away autonomy faster than any physical disease. David had painted me as a doddering old man who couldn't manage his own affairs, justifying his theft as necessity. "I'm not forgetful, Jennifer. I'm just unwilling to enable theft." She hung up without saying goodbye, leaving me with the dial tone and the weight of what I'd set in motion. By noon, the story would be all over town. By evening, it would be in the newspaper. By next week, everyone would know that Tom Richardson had sent his own son to jail. The phone rang again an hour later. This time it was Gerald, his voice cold with barely controlled rage. "Tom, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but you need to fix this. David's been arrested, our plans are ruined, and Patricia is having what I can only describe as a complete breakdown." "I'm not playing any games, Gerald. I'm protecting my property from fraud." "Fraud? The boy was trying to help you. You're too old and too stubborn to see that you need assistance managing your affairs." Too old and too stubborn, the same condescending dismissal David had used, wrapped in concern but edged with calculation. Gerald, your son-in-law forged my signature on loan documents to steal $250,000 from my house. That's not assistance. That's felony theft. You could have handled this privately. Family problems should stay in the family. David made it public when he filed those fraudulent documents with the county. I'm just making sure the consequences match the crime. Gerald's voice rose to a shout. You sanctimonious old fool! Do you have any idea what you've done? David was the only thing standing between us and bankruptcy. Now we'll lose everything. Then you should have made sure your financial planning didn't depend on stolen property. The line went dead with a click that echoed through my quiet kitchen. I sat there for a moment, processing the conversation. Gerald and Patricia's comfortable retirement, their dream of living in my house, their dismissal of my feelings. All of it had been built on the assumption that David's theft would go unnoticed or unpunished. Now their house of cards was collapsing, and they wanted me to rebuild it with my own sacrifice. The doorbell rang at 2 o'clock. Through the peephole, I saw a young woman in a business suit carrying a microphone, a man with a camera standing behind her. Local news drawn by the story of an elderly man who'd had his own son arrested. I didn't answer. Instead, I closed the curtains and let them ring the bell until they gave up and went away. By evening, there would be a story on the 6 o'clock news about family drama and financial fraud. But they'd have to tell it without my participation. The real reckoning came at 4:30 when Marcus Webb called with an update from the courthouse. David's been charged with 3 felonies, he said. Mortgage fraud, forgery, and grand theft. Bail is set at $50,000. Will he make bail? Doubtful. His assets are frozen pending investigation, and given the flight risk assessment, I'd be surprised if anyone puts up that kind of money. David would spend the weekend in jail, maybe longer. The man who'd worn expensive suits and driven luxury cars would be eating institutional food and sleeping on a narrow cot while his world collapsed around him. Thomas, there's something else. David's attorney has filed a motion claiming you're mentally incompetent to make financial decisions. They're asking for a court-ordered psychological evaluation. I'd been expecting this. David's only defense was to paint me as a confused old man who'd been manipulated into filing false charges against his loving son. When? Probably next week. It's a standard desperation move, but given your age, the court will likely grant the evaluation. Let them. I've been making sound financial decisions for 70 years. I think I can pass one more test. That evening, I sat in Margaret's chair and watched the local news. The story was the third item, wedged between a house fire and a school board election. Local man arrested on fraud charges in dispute with elderly father. They used David's mugshot, which made him look haggard and desperate, nothing like the confident businessman who'd sat in my living room planning to steal my house. The reporter interviewed a legal expert who explained the charges and possible penalties. 20 years for mortgage fraud, 10 years for forgery, 5 years for grand theft. If convicted on all counts, David could spend the rest of his productive life in prison. I turned off the television and walked through my house slowly, seeing it as if for the first time. Every room held memories of the life Margaret and I had built together. Every piece of furniture told a story. Every photograph captured a moment when we'd believed the future would be kinder than the past. In David's old bedroom, I found the photo album again. Pictures of birthday parties and Christmas mornings, little league games and school plays. A chronological record of a boy who'd grown into a man I didn't recognize. I turned to the last photo in the album, David's wedding day. Him and Jennifer young and beautiful and full of plans. Margaret and I stood beside them, proud parents celebrating what we thought would be the beginning of happiness for everyone. We'd been wrong about so much. Wrong about David's character, wrong about Jennifer's loyalty, wrong about the kind of people they'd become when money got tight and options got scarce. But we'd been right about this house. Right to pour our savings into something solid and lasting. Right to build a foundation that could weather whatever storms came. Right to create something beautiful that couldn't be stolen or sold or signed away by people who'd never understood its value. The phone rang at 9 o'clock. David's number, but when I answered, it was Jennifer's voice. Dad, please. You have to drop these charges. David's in jail. My parents are talking about suicide. And I don't know what to do. Suicide, the ultimate manipulation, the threat designed to make me feel responsible for consequences I hadn't created. Jennifer, your parents' problems aren't my responsibility. They made financial plans based on property they didn't own. That was their choice. But they're family. We're all family. Family is supposed to help family. Family doesn't steal from family. David crossed that line when he forged my signature. He was desperate. He was trying to save us all. He was trying to save himself by sacrificing me. There's a difference. Jennifer's voice broke into sobs. Please, Dad, I'm begging you. Drop the charges and we'll find another way. We'll sell our house, declare bankruptcy, whatever it takes. Just don't send David to prison. I thought about the boy who'd once brought Margaret dandelions, about the man who'd looked me in the eye and lied about his desperation, about the choice between justice and mercy. It's too late for that, Jennifer. The charges are filed, the investigation is underway. Even if I wanted to drop them, the state would likely proceed anyway. Then you've destroyed us all. I hope you're happy living in your precious house while your family falls apart. She hung up, leaving me with silence and the weight of what I'd chosen. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the windows Margaret had cleaned every spring until they sparkled like promises. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the competency evaluation, the legal proceedings, the slow destruction of whatever relationship David and I had pretended to maintain. But tonight, I was in the house we'd built together, surrounded by proof that some things were worth more than family peace, more than solving other people's problems with your own sacrifice. The Margaret Richardson Memorial Trust would protect this place long after I was gone. David would never be able to touch it, use it, or take it from the memory of the woman who'd made it home. I picked up Margaret's unfinished romance novel and read a few pages past her bookmark. The heroine was facing her own crisis of trust, learning that love sometimes meant disappointing the people you cared about most. It was a lesson I was learning too late in life, but learning nonetheless. Some foundations couldn't be rebuilt once they'd been broken, but others, the important ones, could weather any storm if they'd been built with enough care and protected with enough determination. Tomorrow would test both. The competency evaluation took place on a Tuesday morning in October, in a sterile office that smelled of disinfectant and broken dreams. Dr. Sarah Chen was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with the kind of gentle authority that came from years of separating truth from desperation. Mr. Richardson, I want you to understand that this evaluation was requested by your son's attorney. I'm here to assess your mental capacity to make financial and legal decisions. I sat in the uncomfortable chair across from her desk, wearing the same suit I'd worn to Margaret's funeral. I understand, doctor. Ask whatever you need to ask. For 2 hours, she put me through tests I hadn't seen since elementary school. Memory exercises, pattern recognition, problem-solving scenarios. She asked me to name the president, recall 3 words after a 5-minute delay, draw a clock face showing 3:30. Tell me about your recent financial decisions, she said, pen poised over her notepad. I told her about the house, about Margaret's death, about David's mounting debts and forged signature. I explained the trust I'd established, the fraud charges I'd filed, the choice between enabling theft and protecting what Margaret and I had built together. Dr. Chen listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. Mr. Richardson, your cognitive function is excellent. Your memory is clear, your reasoning is sound, and your decision-making process shows careful consideration of complex factors. She paused. In my professional opinion, you are fully competent to manage your own affairs. Relief washed through me like cool water. Thank you. However, I need to ask, do you understand the consequences of your actions? That your son may face significant prison time? I thought about the boy who'd learned to ride a bicycle in my driveway, about the man who'd forged my signature and lied to his wife and planned to steal my house. Doctor, I understand exactly what David is facing. I also understand that some lessons can't be taught with words. Sometimes consequences are the only teacher that gets through. And you're prepared to live with those consequences? I've been living with the consequences of David's choices for months. Now, he gets to live with them too. The report was filed the same day. Dr. Chen's findings were unambiguous. Thomas Richardson showed no signs of cognitive impairment, dementia, or diminished capacity. His decision to file fraud charges was consistent with protecting his legitimate interests and was made with full understanding of the implications. David's attorney had gambled on painting me as a confused old man. Instead, they'd provided official documentation of my mental competence. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Marcus warned me that it would be difficult, that David would likely plead not guilty and force a trial. But the evidence was overwhelming. Forged signatures, fraudulent documents, David's own admissions. The case was solid. On Friday evening, I was reading Margaret's romance novel when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Jennifer standing on my front porch, alone, her face puffy from crying. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the week's events. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. "Dad, can we talk, please?" She wore jeans and a sweater instead of her usual designer clothes. No makeup, no jewelry, no armor of affluence. Just a woman whose world was collapsing around her. "What do you want to say, Jennifer?" "I want to apologize for everything, for believing David's lies about you being forgetful, for going along with the plan to take your house, for not seeing what he was really doing." The words sounded genuine, but I'd learned to be cautious about trusting people who needed something from me. "Go on." "I found out about the other loans yesterday. David didn't just forge your signature once, he did it 3 times. Different banks, different amounts. He used your house as collateral for almost $500,000 in debt." The number hit me like a physical blow. $500,000. More than the house was worth. More than I'd made in my entire working life. "How much of it did you know about?" Jennifer's face crumpled. "None of it. I swear to you, Dad, I thought those papers I witnessed were legitimate refinancing documents. David told me you'd asked him to handle your finances because you were having trouble managing things." "And you believed him?" "I wanted to believe him. My parents needed help. We were struggling financially, and the idea that you might need care, it seemed to solve everyone's problems. Everyone except me. I was the one who was supposed to sacrifice my home, my independence, my connection to Margaret's memory to solve problems I hadn't created." "What happens now?" I asked. "I'm filing for divorce. I can't be married to someone who would steal from his own father." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "My parents are moving back to Florida. They're humiliated, broke, but they're alive. Despite what I said on the phone, they're not suicidal. That was just desperation talking." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation, but saw only exhaustion and shame. "And David?" "David is facing reality for the first time in his adult life. His lawyer says the best he can hope for is a plea bargain that might reduce his sentence to 5 or 6 years. 5 or 6 years. David would be in his mid-40s when he got out, if he got out. Old enough to start over, young enough to build something honest if he'd learned anything from the experience. "Jennifer, I need you to understand something. I didn't file those charges to punish David. I filed them to protect myself from someone who was willing to steal my house to solve his problems." She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I know, and I know it's too late to fix any of this. But I wanted you to know that not everyone in this family is broken." After she left, I sat in Margaret's chair and tried to process what I'd learned. $500,000 in forged loans, multiple banks, multiple lies, a pattern of fraud that went far beyond the desperate act I'd imagined. David hadn't just made one bad decision. He'd built his entire recent life on theft and deception, using my reputation and my property as tools for his crimes. The phone rang at 9 o'clock. Marcus Webb. "Thomas, I have news. David's attorney contacted me about a plea agreement. They want to avoid trial." "What are the terms?" "Guilty plea to all charges, full restitution to the banks, and cooperation with the investigation. In exchange, they're asking for 8 years instead of the 20 he could get if convicted at trial. 8 years. David would be 50 when he got out, if he got out early for good behavior. His marriage would be over, his business destroyed, his reputation ruined. He'd lose everything except the chance to start over." "What's the restitution amount?" $460,000. The banks want their money back before they'll agree to the plea. And if David can't pay, then he faces trial and likely spends the next 20 years in prison. I thought about the house Margaret and I had built together, about the trust that protected it, about the choice between justice and mercy. Marcus, I want to make David an offer. What kind of offer? I'll provide the restitution money in exchange for his guilty plea and a formal renunciation of any claim to my property or estate. He admits his guilt, serves his time, and when he gets out, he starts over with a clean slate. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Thomas, that's a lot of money, almost everything you have in liquid assets. Money I can afford to lose. Margaret and I lived simply, saved carefully. The house is protected by the trust, and I have enough left to live comfortably for the rest of my life. And David? David gets a chance to become the man his mother hoped he'd be. 8 years to think about his choices and decide who he wants to be when he gets out. The plea hearing was scheduled for the following Friday. David would stand before a judge, admit his guilt, and accept responsibility for stealing from his own father. The banks would get their money back, the courts would avoid an expensive trial, and David would begin serving a sentence that might save what was left of his soul. On Thursday evening, I drove to the county jail to see my son. The visiting room was exactly what I'd expected. Harsh fluorescent lights, plastic chairs, a phone system that turned conversation into performance. David looked older in his orange jumpsuit, smaller somehow, like the fight had gone out of him. When he saw me through the glass, his face crumpled with something that might have been relief or shame or both. He picked up the phone on his side of the partition. "Dad, I didn't think you'd come. I'm here to tell you I'm paying the restitution." David's eyes widened. Why? Because your mother loved you. Because somewhere under all the lies and theft and manipulation, there might still be the boy she raised. Because 8 years in prison might teach you lessons that 60 years of life apparently didn't. David pressed his forehead against the glass, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry for everything. I know you are, son. The question is whether you're sorry enough to change. I will. I swear to you, I'll become someone Mom could be proud of. Don't swear to me, David. Swear to yourself, and then spend the next 8 years proving it." On Friday morning, David stood before Judge Patricia Walsh and admitted his guilt. He confessed to forging my signature, to defrauding multiple banks, to using my property without permission. He accepted full responsibility for his crimes and waived his right to appeal. When it was over, when the gavel fell and David was led away in shackles, I walked out of the courthouse into the October sunshine and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The house would be safe. Margaret's memory would be honored. David would serve his sentence and hopefully emerge as someone worthy of the second chance he was getting. I drove home slowly, taking the long way past the lake where Margaret and I used to fish on Sunday afternoons. The water was mirror still, reflecting the autumn sky like polished glass. A cardinal landed on a branch overhanging the water, its red feathers bright against the gold and brown of October. Margaret always said cardinals were messages from heaven. If this one carried a message, I hoped it was one of approval, because for the first time since her death, I felt like the man she'd married, someone who understood that love sometimes meant disappointing the people you cared about most. The house on Maple Street sat exactly where it had for 32 years, white clapboard siding glowing in the afternoon sun. Margaret's roses still struggled in their beds, but they still bloomed, still reached toward the light despite my clumsy attempts at care. I was home, finally completely irrevocably home.